Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Large Format Photography Podcast. My name is Simon Forster and I'm joined by my co-host Andrew Bartram and our guest Gregg Obst. Hello Andrew.
Hello Simon.
And hello Gregg.
Hello there.
First of all, I'd like to thank Wayne Setzer for being our guest 2 weeks ago. Actually, strictly speaking, it was 1 week ago because we're recording this podcast a week before it goes out, so that confuses me every week. But anyway, thank you Wayne for being on the show and for indirectly causing many people to go hunting for beer mats to assist them in their working out their focus plane and general focusing techniques of large format cameras. So thank you for that, Wayne. Okay, so on to this week. And Andrew, have you been up to anything interesting this week?
Well, I've been answering a few Facebook queries or questions following the said interview with Wayne. Most people's confusion didn't come from their understanding or lack of understanding of the Scheimpflug principle, but what on earth is a beer mat? That would seem to be the most common. And I think maybe, do you not have beer mats in America, Gregg?
I don't. Well, we have coasters. I think it's just a nomenclature problem.
I think it is too. It's definitely. Then you know what it's like. People kept saying, "Well, what's a beer mat?" And I thought, well, did I just make that up, or is it actually, is it just me? Is it some strange Great Yarmouth saying? But you did know, Simon. You know what a beer mat is.
I did, and I'm assuming Wayne did as well, because he didn't actually mention it, but he just might have been polite, I guess.
It was just too nice, wasn't he?
Yeah,
clearly.
Yeah. Well, in your description to people about what a beer mat is, and by the way, coaster's a word we use over here as well, but nobody ever says coaster for a beer mat.
Well, a coaster can be quite. See, I think a beer mat is what you need for this, because a beer mat is generally made of like stiff cardboard. So I'm staring at the same beer mat as I was last week, and this is much more sensible. If you want to make a hole in it, put it around your neck and take it out with you when you're working out your plane of focus. It's much more sensible, because a coaster can be, it can be made out of slate or, some other thick material, which it doesn't inherently lend itself for portability in the field.
This is true. And the other thing of note was you were saying now your beer mats are round, whereas beer mats up here tend to be square but with rounded edges.
Yeah, well, you can get beer mats square with rounded edges. This one is, I think this one is a German one, you see, so maybe German ones are round.
Well, could well be. So
we'll never know.
I'm glad we've helped to clear that one up. So
we do talk some nonsense, don't we? Where you do. So what have I've been mainly doing non-photographic things this week, but I did finally get out on Friday evening. Was it Friday evening? I think so. With my Toyo 45A and a double dark slide loaded with FP4, and I legged it. The sun was about an inch above the horizon, just so you can visualize that, and it was poking in and out of bits of cloud, and I drove down to the location which I was going to shoot for our double exposure tag team challenge, which was being run by the Negative Positives podcast. And I quickly unloaded the Toyo, and I was impressed at how quickly I set it up. And this is familiarity, I think. So you get familiar with your gear, and you can shoot really quickly. Because I had that from parking the car. I probably had that shot done within 90 seconds. That's impressive, including focusing. And I even looked at my film plane, the focus plane, and I kind of estimated where the front tilt needed to be, and I wasn't a million miles off, and I didn't have my beer mat with me, and I got bitten by gnats. We call them gnats, you call them mosquitoes, Wayne. Wayne, have I sent you to sleep? No. Oh, I called you Wayne as well.
Yes,
you're not Wayne, are you?
Exactly.
No.
Yeah,
not this. Not this.
You didn't answer me. No, we were just talking.
We do have gnats. There, some people call them no-see-ums, depending on where you are, and but mosquitoes are much larger capacity for sucking the blood.
Yeah, this must have been mosquitoes, because I felt weak after they'd attacked me.
There you go.
I think I must have lost an armful of blood.
Well, I think the fact that you managed to get it set up and took that shot off as quickly as you did is probably as much to do with muscle memory, though, isn't it? Because it's not the first time you've taken that photograph.
Yeah. Have you entered into the negative positives double exposure tag team challenge, Greg?
No, actually, the only double exposure I've ever made was on Pinhole, and that was quite by accident. Came out nice, but quite by accident.
When's the deadline for this debacle that we're trying to put together?
I thought it was long past.
No.
At least for the non-podcasters.
I think that's it. I think we're using our status as podcast superstars to get a delay on it. I don't think they're actually judging them yet anyway, are they? So and they're doing the podcast challenge is happening at least another week after the main one anyway. So we've got a little bit more leeway than the main event as well.
What's interesting to me is when did Toyo make a 35mm camera? Because the rules clearly state 35mm black and white.
Yes.
Well, we did have a cunning plan for that, Greg. Would you like to hear what our cunning plan was?
Sure.
So I took a spent HP5 roll, and in the dark I got some 35mm Rolly Retro 400S, and in the dark I fumbled around with this length of Rolly and stuck it on the inside of the backing paper, desperately hoping, but not really knowing how, that I would keep it parallel so it didn't sort of go at an angle. And then I rolled it all up and put it in my 6x17 film back. So the plan was to have a 17 centimeter long 35mm sprocket panoramic shot in a large format camera.
That would certainly be interesting.
But it didn't come off. So I think due to logistics and time, and Greg, we're having enough trouble getting a double exposure done on 4x5 sheet film, let alone
very true
17 centimeter. But we thought
the judges will accept that answer.
Okay, we were trying to be really clever, and this is the large format photography podcast after all.
And that is it. Yeah, we were challenged as a podcast to do it, and we're contractually obliged not to shoot 35mm or small format. It was agreed that we could do. I say agreed. We just decided we were going to do it. But we have chatted to Mike and Andre, and it's a case of it was restricted to 35mm for the main competition. Simply for logistics, and it just makes matching people much easier. There's quite a number of people who are actually taking part in this, and mixing and matching different film formats and so on. It's just become too difficult to do it. Whereas doing it with the podcast hosts, wherever they may be, it's just an easier thing to manage. So hence we were allowed to get away with that one. Well, I say that. I'm just about to take my third attempt at actually taking a shot, because the film holders just arrived today, and so I'm going to, for the third time, I'll be able to go there, and maybe I can do it in 90 seconds as well, and take that shot again on both sides. And I've got actually something you said earlier, Andrew. You mentioned that you took your double dark slide out. Now, in my mind, and this is a conversation I've had with Nick Lyle of the Homemade Camera podcast, a dark slide is that bit that goes into a film holder. So I think you took a double film holder out rather than a double dark slide out.
Yeah, you're probably right. But you know what I meant, didn't you?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, but now whenever somebody actually says that, now it goes back to this.
It's probably a double dark slide cut film sheet film holder or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah. I've always accepted that as sort of a Britishism, just like 5x4 instead of 4x5.
Well, I tend to say 4x5. I think it's because I spend too much time talking to Americans.
Yeah, and I say 4x5, but I say 10x8 for some reason. I don't really.
No, I say 8x10 as well now.
Yeah, sold out.
I have. I've gone all American.
Yeah. Okay. So,
what have you been doing then?
I was going to say, you're not going to talk about painting your shed then?
Well, if you want. In fact, it was Julie's shed. Julie's shed I painted.
Well, let's. I do have something to say this week, because I've actually taken some photographs with my which camera? I use the Sinar, and because we've got our darkroom club set up. That's the Six Towns darkroom in Stoke-on-Trent, which is going from strength to strength. We
should put that in the show notes, because you mention it every 2 weeks.
That's it. We haven't really got a proper link for it yet, or if we have, but it's not quite saying the things we needed to say. But if anybody's ever interested in that, just get in touch with me, and we can talk about that. We can't do much in the way of large format, because we don't have a large format. I think I'm going to say this every week. We don't have a large format in larger.
You said that in such a sad voice.
Exactly. But
you can do contact sheets. You have contact prints, can't you? And
yeah. No, we can. And I did actually have my large format camera in use this week, because as part of my Emulsive Secret Santa 18 present, I was given, and I forgot the name of the chap that gave it to me now. I'm not sure if he actually ever told me, actually. But I was paired up with somebody in, I think it was Czech Republic. Yeah, it was Czech Republic. And I was given quite a bit of fomapan, as you might half expect. But also, he gave me some mystery 4x5 film. And I'd said that I was potentially getting into 4x5, and I'm quite pleased that I did now. And he sent me some slow 4x5 film, which he didn't actually know what it was. And it's also film that he cut down himself to 4x5.
So you're missing the notch codes?
Yeah, no notch codes, nothing. And so which also suggests that it might not have been cut down from 8x10. Because I'd imagine, for every 4 you would get one with a notch in, wouldn't you? That would make a certain amount of sense. But no notches at all. And I'm not entirely sure if there's emulsion on both sides. I don't know if it's X-ray film. Really know very little about this film, although I think it might be orthochromatic. Not 100% sure about that. Need to check that, but I get a feeling it might be. But I decided
sounds like it could be X-ray film. I mean, the 810 X-ray film doesn't have any film notches in. Did
you sacrifice a sheet to see what color it was?
Yes, although what color was it now? I've actually forgotten.
Do you mean when he developed it?
No, prior. Before. Some of the X-ray films that were that you'll find out there have really weird blue, green, like almost circus colors. When you pull one out of the box and just as a sacrificial sheet, just to see, kind of determine whether or not there's a notch code and whether or not there's emulsion or either side looks different than the other. To try to make a determination. I bought 3 100 sheet boxes of 5x7 that's like that, and it's this blue. Just a bizarre blue, almost aqua, but not quite. And to this day, I still don't know if it's double-sided or single-sided. And I did run one sheet through in tray development in Pyrocat, 1:1 to 300, just a really weak dilution. And it came out beautiful. So I think I guessed the right one. And I made a little mark on the box as to which side
certainly was the emulsion. So I've never pulled a sheet of my Fuji HRT X-ray film out of the box to look at it. Never occurred to me, because I knew what it was. But certainly after it's developed and fixed, there is a very definite blue tinge to the base of the film. It's not something that washes away, not like an anti-halation layer would do in a traditional film. So it's at first, I thought it needed more fixing, but I didn't. I fixed and fixed it, and it does have a slight blue color to the base, the substrate or the acetate. What's your film look like? Does it have any tinge to it?
Yeah, definitely. Although it's I would say it's a sepia. Yeah, it's quite a strong sepia, I would say.
Okay.
And
I saw some shots you'd posted somewhere online where you were trying to determine the film speed.
That's it. And
it looked quite contrasty. There was some shadow detail there, certainly on the one I looked at. So maybe you got the exposure right, but just need to use I think looks like you either need to use a pyro or try your Cathanol developer if you want to try and retain those highlights.
And that's exactly it. I mean, I've had a go at digitizing, but I've not done a full negative. I've been sort of concentrating on the center part of the image, because each photograph, or the majority of the photographs, I placed a piece of paper right in the center with the exposure rating. And absolutely, and I think that's a good idea. This is pretty foolproof, except that my highlights are blown in every shot, including up to 12 ISO. But the shadow detail, in fact, the overall look of the photographs is gorgeous. I'm really, really pleased with the look of it.
Is there shadow detail in the negative at all, and you're losing it in the scan, or have you examined it on the light box?
Yeah, it's just not there. And the way I'm digitizing, I'm doing it.
Sorry, not shadow detail, highlight.
Yeah, I'm digitizing with the digital camera. I'm not using the scanner, and the amount of detail I'm like using a 90mm macro lens as well. So I'm only taking a photograph of a very small proportion of the shot, and using my Sony full frame camera. It captures highlight, as long as I'm shooting uncompressed. It captures detail in the highlights very, very well. It just isn't there. And you can. I tried to look in the negative as well, and it's just black. But as you just said, though, Pyro or Cathanol CL, and that is definitely something I want to try with this, because I just stand developed it in Rodinal or semi-stand, because doing different speeds, it just made sense to actually do it stand processing.
Yep.
It'd be interesting too to take a look at some tests where you're shooting something that has some predominant areas of red versus blue, to see whether or not it's orthochromatic.
Yeah, and that was actually something I did actually try because I've got in the dark room there, we've got red light, we've got the safe light, and I put a piece out for about a minute and covered it. I didn't have a coin, I just used a cup in the end, to see if it would actually show any difference where the cup was and where the cup wasn't, and I completely messed that up, because one, I put 2 sheets out instead of 1, and although that shouldn't make that much of a difference, because you should see it on one of the negatives, but to develop it, I didn't have space in my tank, so I literally dropped the film into the tank, and I think it just stuck to the side, so it was just a mess. So I'm none the wiser on that. But the overall look of the images is not. It's just that the black and white look of the images is just different from what I would normally see. So I'm just thinking there's something else going on here, which makes me sort of suspect it might be orthochromatic.
Or some kind of copy film or something, or some reproduction type film.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's very exciting. You have had a far more exciting week than me. Greg, have you been doing anything exciting this week?
Yeah, the last week or so, I've been discovering. Normally, the way I work is I research an area to death before I even consider going out, and then I come up with a list of things that I want to accomplish out in that area and GPS locations and what have you. But what I've done is gone to the next county over to the west of us, and just sort of, I know very little about that county except for their county seat, and just went out on some drives and discovered things, and shot a series of different cameras, discovered a ton of abandoned, falling down barns, beautiful farms with silos. It's also a coal mining region, or for the most part a strip coal mining region, so you have a lot of the large industrial things. You have coal breakers up there, you have all sorts of sort of a mix of agriculture and industrial landscapes. And so I've been shooting everything from the infamous 2238 film on 35 millimeter all the way up to 8 by 10 on the Kodak or the Carestream Ectoscan, the single-sided X-ray film.
Oh yeah.
Just trying to get a feel for the area, and the way I work generally is I don't take pictures of things. I take pictures of how I feel about things. So this is an area that I'm going into pretty much fresh. I have no preconceived notions of what this particular part of that county looked like or what it contained. And as I venture around, I'm discovering things and I'm seeing parts of farms that have just been abandoned. And that always makes me, is certainly a sadness there, but it always makes me wonder how. I mean, that's usable land, and in some cases they're still being farmed. Somebody's renting the farm itself, but all the outbuildings, the barns, the farmhouses are either gone or in various states of disrepair. They still make great subjects, and it always makes me wonder, what really happened there. Did somebody just grow old and die, and nobody wanted to take over the farm, or was it a financial thing? And I think all of these things sort of lead into sort of an authenticity in the photos, because there is something that affected people's lives there. It's not just some model that you dragged out into the countryside to take a picture of. It's real life, and real life isn't always so pretty. And so I've been going around, and two of the days I was up there, I was pouring rain, sideways rain, and it's a very hilly area. At one point, I had done a face cast on the Negative Positives podcast Facebook group of an overlook that I discovered up there. And sure enough, the next time I went up and I stopped at the overlook, there was a lightning storm going on. I didn't get out of the car because it didn't look like it was very safe, quite frankly. But it's been a very interesting area to sort of discover, and I can't wait to really drill down into some of the history of those areas and revisit it over and over again.
Well, sounds like you've had you've squeezed more into your week than I think I've done all year, by the sounds of it. So that's fantastic. We'll talk about. You touched on a lot of areas there, Gregg, and I think we'll perhaps dive into those shortly. But do you think, Simon, we ought to just having this preamble, we can perhaps formally introduce Gregg now? Should we do that?
I think that's a very good idea.
Yeah. Do you want me to do that?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Well, if you hadn't already realised, we're very pleased to welcome Gregg Obst. Have I said that right? Obst?
That's correct.
Excellent. Gregg Obst to the show. Gregg was fighting with Wayne last week to come on the show, and in fact one or two other people, as we were desperately searching around to get at least somebody on our list to come and talk to us. So having let him down last week, he's agreed to come on this week, and it's I've been enjoying the preamble. I've been enjoying the chit chat for what we did before we started recording, and I think it's going to be a fun hour or so, or whatever time we've got left. You're very active, Gregg, on many of the Facebook groups with Negative Positives. You're a contributor with our Lensless podcast Facebook group and within the large format Facebook group. So most folks will be familiar with you. Your work is varied in a way from the type of cameras you use, different mediums you use. You seem to get involved in lots of different formats and different films, and I think we're going to have a great time talking to you. But why not just give us the potted Gregg Obst history, and in the normal way that we would do when we have guests on?
Sure. I came to photography a little late in the game. Generally, it was around, I think, 1997. I had just bought a new compact car, and I was looking for an excuse to go on a long trip, basically. And I looked around and didn't really find anything. And I noticed at one of the convenience stores a paper that was showing the local racing. And we have a lot of auto racing that goes on in our area. And it showed different events. So I decided to go to a place in New Jersey, a place called Bridgeport Speedway that was running a late in the season event. I think it was October. And I went there and that sort of got me hooked. And then I went to another much smaller speedway up in the Pocono Mountains area of Pennsylvania. And they had just started that speedway up and they didn't have a photographer there. And I was talking to somebody and they said, well, if you have a camera, you can come up here and take pictures. I didn't have a camera. This is certainly during the highlight of film. Digital was just starting to get into the stores. I hadn't really taken a clear foothold. So when I went looking for a camera, I ended up getting a Canon T50, which was an all automatic FD mount camera. Of course, the FD mount lenses are very good, but the camera itself was sort of bare bones and very basic. And so I got hooked and started doing racing photography. And I did that initially with film, and then film was getting very expensive, even with the 1 hour turnaround, the cheaper prices at some of the drugstores locally. It was still pretty expensive. So I investigated digital, fell into digital for 12 years as a racing photographer, got really good at racing photography, generally regarded as one of the better photographers in specific areas of auto racings, specifically sprint cars and midgets, and then got tired of it. And so I was looking for something a little bit different, and I went to wildlife photography, and I started getting really good at photographing bald eagles at a location that's right on the border between Pennsylvania and Maryland, Conowingo Dam. And I really enjoyed that. But to really excel at that game is an arms race, and it's focal length. And I was shooting with a very sort of underpowered 50 Sigma, what they call the Bigma, which is the 50 to 500 zoom lens. I think it's f6.3, and I was losing that battle. I desperately needed something like a 600 or an 800, and I wasn't in a position to afford that. So I started turning my attention to landscape photography, and unfortunately, I picked up the bug for HDR. And initially, it was the the over the moon sort of something like the surface of Venus kind of HDR, which I'm certainly not proud of. So I made a concerted effort to get more realistic about my processing, and I got pretty good at that. And then, unfortunately, I came down with some kidney problems. And I had been a type 1 diabetic since literally my 21st birthday. That's when I was diagnosed, and it had started killing my kidneys, and I didn't think I really had that much time left. I was on the transplant list, and I wanted to do something that was much more meaningful with the time that I had left. And I started thinking about film photography and really learning photography as opposed to using all these different settings that are available in digital. And lo and behold, on April 16th of 2012, I, for the grace of God, got a transplant for kidney and a pancreas, which essentially rolled back my type 1 diabetes and my kidney problems. And so I was basically left with, well, what do you do now? You're given a life that you didn't really think you were going to have. Now it's the time it's clean slate. You really need to think about your photography. And I had always really held sort of the Ansel Adams look and feel as sort of the pinnacle. Obviously, there's no automation. There were no, internal meters. There's no settings, as it were. And I felt if I really wanted to learn photography at a basic level and be proud of my work, then I needed to sort of get into that world. So I started off how most people do in film photography. I went looking on Craigslist, which is sort of our local service in the United States where people put things for sale locally. And I found a Minolta SRT 201, which was in pretty good condition, 35 millimeter. And I shot with that for 1 or 2 rolls, and then the gas started. And so a Spotmatic F was next, and then a whole litany of M42 lenses, and then Helios lenses for that, and then my first medium format, which was one of those awful Lubitel 166Bs.
Nothing wrong with that. Sorry, I was enjoying listening to you, but I have to jump in and defend the Lubitel. In fact, I've got the Lubitel 2, which is okay. It's a nice simple triplet lens, and you can't focus it.
The lenses are wonderful.
Yeah, you just need to be skillful in the use of it. Anyway, so yeah. Sorry, Greg, you carry on.
Zone focusing is your friend there.
It is.
And so a steady progression of through medium format and buying anything that looked old and in all the local antique places, like a lot of people do. And I saw on eBay one day a Calumet CC401, which is the long rail 26-inch monorail. And these are the ones that were student cameras in a lot of universities. And of course, when digital started to take a foothold, they dumped a lot of that stuff. So I was able to get one of those very quickly and very cheaply, and then started collecting lenses for that. And then trying to haul that thing out into the field was just a pain in the ass. It's large, clunky, and especially with the longer rail, how do you carry that? There's no bag. So I would actually go to Home Depot. Do you have Home Depots in the UK?
No, but we know what you mean.
It's like a big box hardware store.
Yeah.
And I was able to get a soft-sided rolling toolbox and turn the camera upside down and put it across the opening, and that sufficed. Gave me room for 4x5 film holders and lenses, and kind of went that route for a couple of months, and then decided I needed a better monorail. So I got another 4x5, a Calumet 45NX, which was able to be broken down into much smaller pieces. Still had a huge box that it came in.
Why were you persisting down the monorail line at this point? Clearly somebody who wanted, you had a desire to go out into the world with this camera.
Yes.
Presumably not just from the back of your car like I do. So why persist with the monorails?
I was really interested in architecture.
Okay.
Not so much internal architecture, because that's more, a professional level kind of thing, but just making sure that I had all the movements that I could possibly want to keep everything straight, vertical, horizontal, everything in focus, all the good things that a monorail will give you.
Yes. Okay.
But I needed that portability. So I started looking again. And so the first thing I found was Bush Pressman Model D. Which
that's the one that Cameradactyl Ethan was going on about, wasn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, and they're wonderful little cameras. They fold up to probably the smallest footprint that I've seen in any 4x5. You could put them in a little messenger bag, which is great, with 4 or 5 holders and 2 lenses and a dark cloth. And the only problem with those particular cameras is the opening. The lens board is so small. So anything over like a Copal 1, you're pretty much excluded from using. So the smaller lenses were great with that camera, and I took a lot of photos with that camera. And then I decided, okay, well, it's time to really get serious. And 2014, I decided to do a 4x5 for 365 project. And so I didn't really logistically think I could handle developing every day, shooting every day, and developing every day. So I made a rule for myself that I was going to have a post one a day for 365 days, but that I would do most of my shooting on the weekends.
Okay, yeah.
and then develop in batches. And so essentially I was shooting for the next week during each week. And that worked out really well. And I finished that. I had tried a digital 365 project prior and only got to, I think, day 56. So I was pretty proud. And when you really push yourself to shoot and have enough good shots for every day, and you have a lot of really bad winter weather too, you get pretty good. You get to the point where you know what shots not to take. You start to understand your limitations, whether they be within your own skill set or within the gear that you have, and you work very hard to overcome those limitations.
Sorry, Greg. So I've got for folks listening, if you want to look at some of Gregg's pictures for his 365 project, you have an album called 4x5 for 365 Project 2014.
Yep.
And so each of these pictures we're looking at here is you shared one of these a day. Is that
That's
right?
Correct.
Just to clarify, we're talking about Flickr now, aren't we?
That's
yes.
correct.
What did I say?
You didn't.
Didn't I? Okay. Yeah, I'm talking about Flickr. So if you type in Gregg, Gregg, and then OBST, or one word, you'll find Gregg on his Flickr site. So we'll be referring to his Flickr site. So you've got a very eclectic, and you've done everything from shooting pictures of books to still life, Polaroid. You've really tried all sorts, haven't you?
There was a steady progression because I did start posting on January 1st, and the weather can be really hard around here.
Yeah.
So you'll see a progression where we don't have any leaves on the trees.
Yeah.
You'll see a progression through
indoor stuff. So you honed your still life.
Yep, a lot of indoor stuff, a lot of X-ray film initially, and you'll see the progression from not knowing how to develop X-ray film all the way to actually getting a range of contrast eventually, and starting to move outside, starting to get a more varied variety of subjects. You'll also see a lot of, once I do move outside for more of the shots, you'll see a lot of agriculture, a lot of barns, a lot of battlefields. There's a lot of historical stuff around us, and I've really sort of gravitated towards those things.
Including a stitched together panorama using X-ray film.
Yes.
So you've got 5 large format 4x5 X-ray film negatives to form a panoramic sweeping view of a bend in the Crypt Row section of Laurel Hill Cemetery, Philadelphia. Wow.
Yes. That's our big Victorian style cemetery. I think it's the second oldest one in the country.
You don't do things by half, do you?
No.
Could we just touch upon, because you've mentioned X-ray film, and I'm on that album now, and I'm looking at the images, and I'm thinking these don't look radically different from other types of photographs. And I was sort of expecting it because it's not, it's an odd film to use. Mm-hmm. So perhaps you could explain what the benefits are of X-ray film.
Initially, I started with the Fuji HRT 30, which I think, Andrew, you're working on a variety of that, or a variant?
Yeah, I don't think it's 30. It's HRT. I don't know. Anyway,
I think it's just a rebranded version of that same one.
So, but yeah, same as HR. It was HRT and then
HRU. Yep.
Yeah.
Initially, I chose that because it was cheap. It was $27, I think, for a 100 sheet box.
That's my reason for having 2 boxes of 100 sheets in the fridge.
I like that reason too.
Yeah, and I mean, you could shoot 1 million sheets of that, and then go through all sorts of variations in your development, just trying to do a somewhat less than scientific honing down of what you should be using as far as like how you rate it. One of the interesting things about X-ray film that isn't very apparent is it responds differently to different contrast light and different subjects. So it's not just a matter of shooting something that's red and that's going to get darker. It's also, is it a very contrasty light out? Is it a golden hour light? and your exposure and what you rate it at as far as your IE setting can vary, 20 to 40 ISO setting points based upon the quality of the light or the type of the light.
Yeah, is it the amount? Is it therefore like with the direct Harman direct positive paper? Certainly, the same thing applies there because it's depending on the amount of UV light there is around at any
Exactly,
time
it's the wavelength of the light that you're experiencing.
Yeah, you see, I need to. We're going to probe you a bit more, so to speak, on X-ray film because I'm still in a learning. Despite having 2 boxes of this stuff in my fridge, I've just largely been shooting it in the pinhole camera. I've tamed the contrast control well enough, but I've been using it for a bit of contact printing, a bit of alternative processing. But I've just started putting it in a 4x5 camera, cutting it down in the darkroom. But I do need to play a bit more now. So carry on, Greg, because this is fascinating. Because I'm only using the double-sided stuff. So you talk about how your progression from the Fuji stuff then.
So I there's a thread on the large format photography. I think it's largeformatphotography.info forum. This is the one that Matt was talking about, full of curmudgeon-y old men. And that's definitely that's the best way to describe that place. But they're also extremely knowledgeable curmudgeonly old men. And so somebody, I want to say by now, it's probably about 6 years ago, stumbled on that HRT 30. And then various, I think there may have been an AGVA variant of it, and things of that nature. It's basically a blue-based or a green-based X-ray film. And they were all comparing notes. And that went on and on and on. And there's a thread out there that I'm sure is several thousand pages by now. And anybody who's really gone through X-ray film to sort of learn all the nuances has probably seen that thread. And you could spend months just reading that. And then you start to develop a feel for who really has nailed down their settings and their sort of the best note takers are the ones that you're looking for. And so when they discover something, generally it would be a breakthrough for everybody because it was very much a rising tide floats all boats kind of mentality. Everybody was willing to share knowledge and everybody sort of benefited from that. And the one thing I saw in there one day was this single-sided emulsion. And I'm like, well, that's certainly going to take care of the problems where you're either going to be doing rotary in a tank, or if you're using rough bottom sort of development trays, if you're doing tray development. And so I looked at it, and it's quite a bit more expensive. It's about, right now, I think it's probably about 95 cents a sheet. So you're not saving that much, but you're still saving 30 or 40 cents a sheet over the cheapest FOMA for an 8x10 sheet. And at that point, I was still cutting that down to 4x5 for my own uses. I hadn't gone into 8x10 or 5x7 at that point. So I started looking at that, and I started taking that out into a lot of, I guess the commonality was there's a lot of stone subjects, so a lot of cemeteries. There's some pretty good Victorian cemeteries with lots of stone art and that kind of thing. And I had some really, really good success with some of that single-sided Carestream Ectoscan BRA, it's called.
I think I've seen you mention this film probably when I was asking about it. I'm sure somebody told me about the Carestream film, and I looked at it, and it was hard for us to get in the UK. I think it was readily available in America, and then we get hit by postage and import duty. I mean, even with the Fuji stuff, I get hit with import and import duties and postage. But even with those, it's still pretty darn cheap, the Fuji stuff.
James Guerin actually asked me to send him some of that stuff in exchange for some some pinhole stuff. But it just the shipping to get it over there was pretty prohibitive.
The shipping seems to be, when I've sent stuff to the States, it's not been too bad from the UK, but a similar size thing coming from America to here seems to be much more, and I've never really worked that out.
Yeah.
So the X-ray, the single-sided X-ray for folks listening is Carestream. That's the make, isn't it?
Yep. There are several brands, but that seems to be the one that's available the most.
And which is there like a reference number or make, or
no, it's just Carestream Ectascan with a EKTASCAN and then a B, and I always forget this if it's a /RA or a BR/A, but that's sort of the designator for it.
Okay.
It's a radiographic film, so it's X-ray, but they use it with for instance, like mammography machines and things of that sort of nature. That they're taking pictures of not just the body, but of screens.
Okay. And is that? I think eventually this X-ray film presumably is going to just fade away. Is it once? Being replaced by digital technology.
That is the fear. Currently, I buy mine through a company. I forget where I think they're somewhere in the Midwest called ZZ Medical, and they have a website at zzmedical.com. And I've heard horror stories about people trying to buy X-ray film from other places, other medical warehouses, and being denied because they're not, don't have an affiliation with the doctor's office or whatever. They've never asked anything.
No.
And they've been great to deal with, and they always have this stuff in stock. So, I've dealt with them, but yeah, you see the prices go up, and in the last 2 years, they've jumped probably $15 to $20, sometimes $25 a box for a 100 sheet box. So it gets me a little bit worried, and obviously the cut over to digital X-ray is going to hasten all that from staying in the marketplace. And now Matt had said something years ago that X-ray film doesn't have the same shelf life. Now I haven't heard that from any place else. I've been trying to find some source for that to back that up, but that also has me worried because obviously you can freeze it, but what else is affecting this stuff that wouldn't affect a general panchromatic film?
Yeah, I don't know. I never considered that. I haven't frozen mine. I've got two boxes. I bought a box of 10 by 12 by mistake, thinking it was 8 by 10, and then I've got a box of 8 by 10. So this is going to last me forever because I'm using it in mainly 8 by 10 pinhole. I have cut it down to 4 by 5, but I'm not sure whether I want to persist with cutting it down. I'll probably just stick with using FP4.
Yeah.
So apart from cost, what would you say are the benefits? Is it its sensitivity? Because I mean the Fuji stuff is orthochromatic, so that has a high red sensitivity.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff that I generally shoot, things that are rusted or gritty, or I generally tend to gravitate towards historical architecture. So that sort of thing ends up, at least on the Ectascan BRA, really nice looking. A great tonality, but a tonality that reminds you, I guess, a little bit like FOMA, in that the general look is like a 1970s Tri-X. So you get that sort of gritty, you get the good shadow quality, but a darker shadow quality. And I found that you really don't want to process this any other way but sort of either rotary for, in my case, I was using rod and all with 1 to 100. I also played around with 1 to 200 for about 6 or 6.5 minutes in a Jobo rotary tank. Or you want to do some sort of stand development. And with the orthochromatic, you can do stand development and use a red light, a very weak 7 watt or less red light, and do a development by inspection.
Yeah. So I was looking. While you were talking, Greg, I pulled up a shot that caught my eye, which was of a weatherboarded, straight-on view of a house with some surrounded by trees, a little bit of sky.
Yep.
This is number 159 in your project. This is one of the several houses left in Walpack Center, New Jersey. And you were using the Bush Pressman Model D.
Yep.
And here you said, so Kodak Ectoscan BR/A single-sided X-ray film. You give some exposure details, and you say it's semi-stand development in Rodinol, or the ADOX variant. 1 to 100 for 15 minutes. That doesn't sound very long for a stand. Normally, stand development is people do that for about an hour or something.
Yep. This is that progression of trying to figure out what I was actually doing.
Okay.
Yeah. So
this was in the mod. So this is in a mod 54. So you had the mod 54 insert in a Patterson tank. So you weren't doing this by inspection, or did you pull it out?
No.
But you clearly got something here. You've got some. Okay, you're in the very. I don't know how you were metering this, but you've got some very dense shadows. But it's perfectly acceptable, isn't it? It's a nice image.
Yeah, I should mention I don't do darkroom printing. I had been doing a little bit of darkroom printing before we moved, and I've sort of lost those facilities to. I don't have a darkroom sink anymore. I don't have a way to easily do that. So what I'm shooting for and exposing for is generally a scan rather than a print.
Right. So
my densities are quite different than somebody who would be doing something for darkroom printing.
So would you? It's we've gone on a bit of a segue here, but I think it might be an interesting one. So, my understanding, if you're making a negative for scanning as opposed to printing, you would be looking for something on the thinner side.
That's correct.
For scanning.
Yep.
So you don't, but presumably you don't want to lose your shadow details. So but basically, I suppose you need to do some tests and determine the fastest speed you can use for that film without losing shadow detail, and then not over developing. That would give you the thinnest sort of negative, wouldn't it?
Definitely.
In fact, that's the old boys would always tell you that you should always aim for the thinnest negative possible with good shadow details, and that way you're not pushing contrast and you're not pushing grain and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah, the more perfect you can get that going into either process, whether it be scanning or the darkroom or alternative prints, then you really are going to benefit by nailing that up front.
So this at this point, when you were doing semi-stand development in Rodinol for 15 minutes, did you you've now abandoned that technique, have you? For X-ray?
Absolutely. So generally these days I use Bessler 8x10 print tank, which holds. There's several different models, but the ones that I have hold a single sheet of 8x10 or with a small insert that holds them in place, 4 sheets of 4x5. And then I use about 700 milliliters of Rodinol in there, and I'll use a 1 to 150 ratio and do it for, I think, 6.5 minutes. And I lay that on top of a Unicolor 352 auto-rotating drum. So it takes care of all that. It doesn't do anything like the Jobo would with the temperature control, but generally I'm doing everything at room temperature anyway.
Yeah, so I followed James Guerin's advice with the double-sided X-ray film, and I trade developed that with some glass on the bottom of my trays.
Yep. Little tip with that is go to your dollar store or dollar store equivalent in the UK.
Pound store.
Poundland.
Yeah, you got it.
And when you're not buying that Poundland film, which I guess you can't.
You can't get now. No, it's gone.
No. Go to the section that has the 8x10 portrait sort of frames. They're really cheap ones, not the plastic frames, but get the glass ones, and then just take the frame, throw the frame away, get the glass, put that in your in your tray, and that will keep the scratching to a bare minimum if you're using the double-sided stuff.
I think I hunted in our spare room for some old frames and took out some glass, but it did occur to me when I was hunting, I said, I can go to a cheap shop to get some old frames. So I'm with you on that. But my process is actually similar, I guess, but I'm using, James recommended a start point of 1 to 100 Rodinol and 5 to 6 minutes, but turning with no agitation, other than turn the sheet over once every minute, so it gets, I suppose, developer to both sides. But other than that, no agitation at all. And I got before that some pre-washing to get rid of, otherwise you get strange marks on the film. But in terms of the development, that sort of 5 or 6 minutes time. So I found that I was getting nice negatives that I could make traditional contact prints from. But for my salt printing escapades, which I get mercifully ribbed for, I found that I needed to up the density a bit more, or the negative contrast. I wasn't really sure what it was, so I changed one thing at a time. So I changed the development from 1 to 100 to 1 to 50 without really doing much more differently to making the negative in the first place. And I found that increase in contrast that the 1 to 50 gave me was enough to give me a more pleasing density in the salt printing process, which is inherently a low contrast sort of process anyway.
Sure.
So broadly similar, but mine were just, as I say, in the tray, turning it over.
Yeah. One of the goals with using X-ray film was to get something that I could really experiment with at a cheap level.
Yeah.
Because one of the projects that I've been working on, I think it's the 4th year that I'm working on it, is a project called Farmscapes of the Civil War, where I've been shooting various battlefields and the farms. The areas during the Civil War, the American Civil War, were primarily either railroad-based or agrarian. So we had a lot of farms, a lot of families sharing farm responsibilities, and a lot of them paid a terrible price in the looting and just general destruction, more so from the enemy soldiers coming in, even friendly soldiers, and just completely devastating everything that the family had before they left and went on to the next battle. So I wanted to try to capture these areas, which are preserved, a lot of them, very well. Not everything is original, but you sort of do your research and figure out which ones are original. Even if they aren't original, they're generally a pretty good subject for large format. And so I've been using both a combination of 4x5, 5x7, and 8x10, with the hopes of eventually moving into contact prints with cyanotypes, but T-toning them.
Yep.
And
I like that effect, because you're getting rid of the harsh blue, aren't you? And getting
exactly, yeah,
more browny, oldie worldy look, I guess.
Yeah, and one of the people that I think it was about 6 months ago signed up for the Lensless podcast Facebook group is Teresa.
Yep.
And she had a series of videos on YouTube where I learned how to do a lot of the cyanotype. Now she was doing with Holga negatives, but she was doing it on cloth, cotton cloth squares, and that sort of really tripped something in my head where, I could do something that was not quite a canvas print like I would have done back in the digital days, but would still have a little bit more, in my mind at least, permanence, or a little bit more of a tactile feel, that you could actually kind of have a little bit more of the area invested. And I'm still trying to figure out how I would do that in a book form. I think it would just be something that I would put up on the wall. But my ultimate goal is to have all these things from this project set up as either 8x10 contact prints with cyanotype, which is T-toned, or the potential, and this is a format that I really like, is 5x7 in an 11x14 matte, which really seems, at least for me, to draw my attention inward to the photo. And that's something that I sort of fell in love with when I went to a Paul Strand exhibit that the Philadelphia Art Museum had a couple of years ago. He had a lot of his more well-known works in a smaller matte, smaller photo in a large matte like that. And it seemed to be something that would really lend itself well with some of these older farms and fence rows and stone walls and things that I'm accumulating through this project.
What about liquid emulsion on paper or cloth? Have you considered that?
I haven't played with it yet. I do have a what is it? Colloid, I think. I forget the name of the actual company that puts it out. It's sold through Freestyle. They're a dry plate kit. That's something that I definitely want to start investigating. And
but you can buy I don't know what, over here in the UK, there's, I think, Photo Speed, which is not British, but it's European company. Photo Speed certainly make one, and Rolly, I think, make a liquid emulsion. So it's you heat the container up and pour some of this stuff into a container, and then under subdued lighting or the correct safe lighting, you can just brush it onto whatever
I've
surface.
seen Tina Rowe do that with, I guess it was seashells.
Yeah, she does. She's doing that project, and I think that would kind of fit, because she's a very thoughtful photographer, and in much the same way as that you're thinking of the why and the where and the how, and trying to relate meaning to places through her image making. So she's exploring all sorts of ideas of identity, of heritage and self. She's she was a mixed race adoptee, so she has she grew up with all sorts of questions around her heritage and questions of the past, and so she spends a lot of time on the London seashore mudlarking for these oyster shells. And she coats them with liquid emulsion and uses, I think, a variety of found negatives of people who's lost images, things she finds in junk stores and things, to try and make some comment on the past. But really it's around her own feelings and emotions to do with past and identity.
She's really tying it all together in the end.
She is, yeah. And it seems like your sort of Civil War stuff. Wouldn't it be great if you could find some vintage cloth or something from that era to coat this stuff onto? Yeah. I'm not suggesting you go and vandalize some of these sites and sort of prize off bits of weatherboard.
Yeah, no, over here that's actually a federal offense if you take anything back from the battlefield.
Yeah.
So that's a thought, because I think it's I'm not sure if it's uniquely American thing, but do they still make like patchwork quilts with sections on them with scenes of things?
Absolutely. In the area that we live, it's very heavily influenced by the Pennsylvania Dutch, or more correctly, Pennsylvania Germans. And the Amish and the Mennonites, and that's one of their specialties, are these sort of storytelling quilts.
Well, that's just the thought of this has just been triggered by the conversation you've just been having there, and I'm just wondering if there's some kind of scope to actually do a photographic version of one of those using one of these liquid emulsions and then projecting onto these sections of the quilt some of the photographs of your Civil War type of imagery.
Yeah, certainly an interesting idea.
It's not often I have those.
At this point, I'm so open, to all sorts of different ideas. One of the reasons that the project has gone on so long is I'm still trying to figure out where I'm going with it. Eventually, it's going to be a book form. And then there may be, something other than that if I can get some exhibit space or something. But the question has been, how much do I want to invest in sort of rehashing the history and putting a more thorough narrative along with that? I feel like I want to do that, but the problem is there's been so many books published that sort of I'm not sure what I could add, and I could certainly cause a lot of controversy because there's the sort of the mindset around the Civil War in a lot of these areas is these people that follow the Civil War, whether they be reenactors or just general sort of people with an interest in it, they're extremely passionate, and to the point where they have fist fights over things. They have long drawn out Facebook exchanges that get very, very heated, and they all have an opinion about everything. And I want to sort of stay away from giving anything but what the pictures say about the area.
Yeah, no, totally understand. Excuse me. I'm just wondering if we can move things on a little bit into the direction of why you take your photographs, the direction that you go with your photography. Have you got any thoughts you want to expand on that front?
Yeah, I guess I'm a little different than most people when they go out. I think people tend to fall into one of three groups. They either go out for just the fun of it, and you'll see a lot of these people will not be large format photographers, because I think to be a large format photographer is to also shoot with a lot more intent, and certainly a lot more sort of investment in time and resources, and bringing out a big tripod and everything else is definitely a commitment. But you'll have the people who will go out and just kind of browse an area. These are the photo walk people that sort of, they do some brilliant work a lot of times. But that would drive me nuts. And then you have the people who are sort of very focused on going to an area and taking specific pictures of specific things. I tend to be in the third group, where I go out and I make photographs of things. They may be subjects that you see in the picture, but I'm not photographing the subject. I'm photographing how I feel about the subject. And I know that sounds a little bit like art school BS, but that's really sort of how I feel. And there have been times, I do a lot of day trips, and there have been times when I've driven like 5 or 6 hours one way and gotten to a spot and I just feel nothing. Or I feel like it's just not the day to be photographed. Could have potential on another day, but it's just not that day. And I've turned around and gone home. Because I know the photograph that I would have forced would have just not been the photograph that had to be made. And so that leads to, I guess, a little bit more investment into the actual art of making a photo, but it also means I don't take as many photos, and I don't quite tie all the loose ends in the work together in a timely fashion. It just takes a lot longer to sort of go places and have the feeling be right.
So when you've gone on one of these trips, Greg, and you've driven a couple of hours, or I've no idea how long you drive for, most of us would, having gone all that way, would just, for the heck of it, make an image and hope for the best, I suppose. Certainly I would, in most cases. So what is it, do you think, that's stopping you doing that on some occasion? Could it be the kind of day you've had? Could it be the lighting? Could it be some other emotion or feeling that you can't quite put your finger on?
It's definitely a mix of all those things. If I get cut off, if I get cut off in traffic on the way there, I may be just in a really foul mood, and that will affect things. My back hurts because I've been carrying around an 8x10, and several film holders in a heavy backpack. That will tend to affect my mood. Sometimes it's things that you just get there, and there's just this weird feeling that, especially some of these historical places, that it's just not that day. It'll be a different day, but it's just not going to be that day because the site isn't giving you what you need for that connection. And it's a little weird to think of it that way. But
well, it's not. It's not really. I'm minded to make a couple of comparisons. There was on Sunny 16 podcast, Eric, I forget his surname,
Conspiracy of Cartographers.
Yes, yeah. So I've got a couple of his zines, but I really enjoy when he talks. He was on, maybe it was probably a year ago now, talking about his sort of road trip, and he visited a lot of Native American Indian sites, and he speaks about, with some clarity, speaks about the kind of feelings he had there, and the overwhelming sense of sadness, and sometimes I don't think he made photographs there.
Yeah, I have that zine that you're talking about, the one from, I guess, 2 summers ago, and his talk of having women and children massacred at 2 or 3 different spots along his trip, just the overwhelming sadness and the energy, because everything is essentially energy, right? Whether it's energy that's newer energy or energy that's been left over, at least in my beliefs, energy that's been left over for centuries, sometimes longer, that's just sort of staying there and inhabiting the place. All of that stuff, it doesn't affect everybody, but it affects those people who are sensitive to it. Some people are more intuitive than others, and they will pick up on that. We were discussing in the pre-show banter that my wife, one of her sort of qualities is that she, for her entire life, has been extremely intuitive and will pick up on what a lot of people will call ghosts or residual energy. And she will be able to have things sort of playing on a loop that will be revealed to her. And that's always interesting when we go to these battlefields. She's come back to the car crying, and I've had to tell her, what happened there. And she's described people down to their dress and what they were wearing and what direction they were heading and what they were saying. And all of that checks out with historical facts that are known to be true. And there have been places where I've taken her, for instance, the John Slider Farm on Gettysburg, which is a fairly remote place to get to. You have to kind of hike a trail down into a valley, and not generally someplace that, unless you're working for the Park Service, that you can drive to. And I knew that a specific corner of the property had been used to stack dead Confederate bodies, but she certainly doesn't know any of that stuff because it doesn't really interest her as something that she would sit down and watch a movie about or read. And she described that same scene to me based upon what she saw, the history and the residual energies that she saw. So, sometimes when I get to these places, it's almost always when I'm by myself, and I just don't feel like it's the right time. I generally hearken back to the fact that it's all energy, and that energy can be negative sometimes.
Do you get these feelings when you've been a long way and you don't end up making an image? Does it tend to be those sites then with some strong residual historical residue, if you want? If you were just going to photograph I don't know, a shopping mall or some sort of Stephen Shaw type topographic image, do you get different feelings then, or is it the same?
Sometimes it's it's the feeling that it's not the right time, or sometimes it's an outright feeling of dread. Oftentimes when I go to we'll take the Stephen Shaw sort of abandoned thing. You'll go to in front of a Kmart, which was a major chain here in the U.S., and they're probably 5% of the stores that originally were open still exist. And you'll go to one of these places and you'll feel nothing because there's no connection. There's no, there's no real history. There wasn't a reason for those people to still stick around. And it's not a place for energy to exist. It's a place for energy to be absent. And so I feel nothing for those places. And I feel bad about that. And other times I've arrived at, we went up to a place near Buffalo, New York. I think it was last year or the year before for one of my wife's things. And I happened to be driving around by myself and I saw this old Kmart. And I felt that a statement had to be made about the fact that it was closed and sort of, I hate to bring, Donald Trump into it, but there are certain reasons.
Oh, please do. Please do.
There are certain reasons why a lot of these places, and for years they've been going out of business, not just Trump, but a lot of these places are places that, really don't get supported by the neighborhood anymore because the industry has left the neighborhood, or, the reasons for people to be more affluent in the area have left. And so, I feel compelled to sort of, even if it's with my phone, which is what I did on that particular day, I just used my phone to take sort of an ironic empty parking lot with a single, shopping cart in the shopping cart carousel out in the parking lot, that kind of thing. So there's all sorts of reasons for taking a photo in my mind, and all sorts of reasons, sometimes more, to not.
Yeah, I kind of have had a similar experience. I've had a couple of trips now to World War One and World War Two battlefields, but particularly 3 years ago, a friend and I went on a 4-day trip around what's called the Ypres or Ypres salient, and Ypres, YPRES, was an area that saw much fighting between 1914 and 1917, culminating sort of in Passchendaele battle. And we just, but there's not much to see. You see, there's not, unlike World War II sites, there are things left behind, brick reinforced buildings and bunkers and gun emplacements. But with a lot of these World War One sites, my friend was driving me to these graveyards where either the fallen were gathered together and lined up nicely in nice cemeteries, or sometimes the graves were erected where they fell. And I had my large format camera with me, and I didn't really know what was going to come of this trip. And so I would be drawn inevitably to the landscape around the cemetery. So we'd go to these places, and I remember one we went to, which was I think it was a Yorkshire Regiment trenches, and there's not much. There's a little bit of a touristy thing there, and then there's all these warehouses, modern warehouses, and I just photographed these warehouses because what kept coming into me is, well, what's underneath these buildings? And I ended up photographing really quite banal things, but they saw the slaughter of hundreds or thousands of people, and I felt some sort of connection with the land, and I felt, well, people are working in these places day in and day out. I'm sure they probably do know the history of these areas, but it looked 100 years ago it was just devastated land and mud, and now it's a warehouse, and I photographed this warehouse, and it was just a banal photograph, but it resonated so much with me because of what had gone on there 100 years before.
It's definitely a hidden story to be told there.
Yeah. Simon.
I'm finding this fascinating. I mean, we touched upon a similar thing a couple of podcasts back with Stephen
Segal,
Stephen Segersby, and I talked about a particular place that he had taken some photographs and felt similar things to what Steve was talking about, and now what you're talking about, and Gregg, and I'm just wondering now, because I'm just wondering if we talked about this with Graham as well, potentially in an earlier podcast, and I'm just wondering, does large format photography put you in more in touch? I could be talking complete nonsense here. There might be some people just laughing at me now, but I'm just wondering if it does actually put you more in touch with what's going on a different level, because you are taking so much time with your photographs. You do tend to be able to take in what's going on around you, and there've been plenty of times where especially with these old sites where I might go to, and there's a place called the Magpie Mine, which is about 30 miles away from my house, and I've been there a few times, and I've thinking there's good photographs here, but I just don't. I'll go there, and sometimes the light's okay, because I mean, at one point when we're talking about going somewhere and you just don't take the photograph, I mean, I think some people might be saying, well, perhaps the light just wasn't right, and therefore you didn't take the photograph. But I've been to places such as the Magpie Mine, and the light has been fine, but I felt like I could just not be in tune with the place. And I know that there are interesting photographs to be taken, and I could see them, but it just didn't feel right. And I just wonder if our slow way of doing things just makes us more attuned to that kind of thing.
I think if anything, it clears your mind, much in the way that maybe meditation does. You're so focused. I know that the one thing that I'm not thinking about when I'm doing large format photography is work. I'm not thinking about bills. I'm not thinking about the jerk that cut me off in traffic, the day before. I'm not thinking about any of those things, because I am so absorbed into that camera. In a way, you just simply can't be absorbed in any other kind of photography. It's just so you really do have to meet it way more than halfway in many cases, and I'm sure that will get even a stronger pull if I went to something like wet plate or dry plate, or something that was even more esoteric. I certainly feel that way with pinhole. It's very contemplative, and I think by clearing your mind, you're starting to think more about not just the subject, but why is the subject here? What happened with this subject? What, in the case of a lot of these abandonments, like I talked about in the beginning, I'm wondering why these farmhouses aren't inhabited. They certainly seem like they could be fixed up, but there's more to that story that, maybe a little bit of more research might enlighten me, but in many cases, nobody even knows on the tax records who owns those properties anymore. And so you start to think about a lot of things that you don't think about had you been using maybe something a little bit more portable, or something where you can just use muscle memory and shoot with. It really does open up a whole other part of contemplative photography for a lot of people.
Yeah, you mentioned pinhole, and that's a common thread when I speak to fellow pinhole photographers, be it large format pinhole or more often than not roll film. It's the you can be making an exposure for minutes or longer, possibly. We were photographing on World Pinhole Day in a church, and some of those exposures were 30 minutes, and whatever your faith or not, those old buildings are soaked with the memories of all sorts of people, and just being forced to sit still. And by the nature of these places, you tend to be quite quiet. 30 minutes would pass. There was 3 or 4 of us, and 30 minutes would just fly by. And I think we all came away from that experience feeling curiously rested and fulfilled. And I think part of that was just the contemplative nature of the photography and also the place itself.
Absolutely. I photograph quite a lot at a penitentiary that's been closed, I think, since 1971. It was actually abandoned for probably 20 or 30 years, and then they fixed up enough of it to make it a tourist attraction in Philadelphia. It's called Eastern State Penitentiary, and I actually have a membership there, so I can get in. They
let you out again. They let you out.
Yeah. It's always a bonus, and it's the same thing there. That the punishment system there was they started back in 1829, I think it was. So it's one of the oldest, if not the oldest, major penitentiaries in the United States. And the method of punishment there was very much a solitary confinement kind of thing. You were put into a cell by yourself, and they have these slits across the ceiling, which let in a very concentrated beam of light down onto the floor. And that was the only thing that you would see for much of your day, except when the guard would open up the small window to give you your food. And they called that the eye of God, because you were doing penance and you were to think about what you had done to put you there, and knowing that God was always watching you. And to photograph in that place it's very special. It can be very eerie sometimes, especially in the winter when there's only a few tourists coming through and it's not heated, so it's about 5 degrees sometimes. You can really sort of feel what they felt, if for only the briefest 15 or 20 minutes that you're there. Almost everything is long exposure in that place because it is darker in the corridors. And I've photographed, knowing it would turn out this way, I've photographed several large format. They're on Flickr, where the people show up as ghostly apparitions. They do an audio tour there, and so everybody's walking around with their audio tour cassettes on, and they're very in their own world, and they don't care if they walk in front of your camera. They don't care if they just stop there. And the thing that they're not doing is they're not conversing, and they're not looking at their phone generally, which is very unique in this day and age. They're just kind of walking around, discovering things and listening to the story. And so they become part of the subject themselves. And they become, because it's a darker area, they become almost a ghostly apparition as they move through the area. And I've really enjoyed making some of those photographs.
Looking at your album in Flickr called Eastern State Penitentiary, are these all made with large format?
No, some of them are.
There looks like an HDR thing here. You mentioned HDR.
Yeah, there's some of the original ones would have been HDR from when I first started going there. I've done some work there with a Nikon F4S 35 millimeter, and I've done a lot of work there with both Bronica medium format and Mamiya C330 medium format, and then a surprisingly productive series of photos done on 4x5 with I think it was a Sakai Toyo metal fuel camera with X-ray film. And so a lot of the better ones, or at least the ones I consider to be the better ones, are ones that I shot with that camera on X-ray film.
Folks listening, I'd recommend that you check out Gregg's album on the Eastern State Penitentiary. I've got one immediately, and of course I think the it's the barbershop inside, and of course I looked at it first of all and did a double take, because you think it's bound to be an electric chair, but clearly it's not.
Yeah, a lot of people make that mistake. They did have an electric chair, but it was in a different part of the building.
But this barbershop chair is kind of in fairly good condition, and it's in this appallingly rundown little area.
Yeah, and they doubled as dentist chairs, and
there probably was quite a bit of pain when in there if someone was having their teeth yanked out. So what are you? This was with a Bronica medium format camera, but the same challenges for you with your. So in a place like this, are they happy for you to set your tripod up with a large format camera? And
surprisingly, it's one of the only places in the area that is they love photographers because photographers bring all sorts of other people in, and they're great for word of mouth. Basically you set up an area like that and you make it tripod friendly, and the people will flock there in droves. When you have that much texture, I call it texture Disneyland, because it really is a place that just it's falling apart, but it's also shored up at the same time. So you're never in any danger in the cell blocks that they allow you in.
This picture looks particularly well lit, and sometimes it's not. It's just with a long exposure, it ends up looking more like daylight than it really was. But what sort of technical challenges are you faced with in there, particularly using a view camera?
A lot of it is just making sure that you're getting into the shadows with a long enough exposure, but not having that eye of God light at the top just blow everything out.
Yeah. And then you're using PyroCat, so pyro staining development. We've touched on those in previous shows. This particular one, you're using PyroCat HD.
Yes.
I know there are several variants, aren't there? And I can never remember which.
Yeah, there's HD and then there's MC. And generally speaking, the MC, they say, is usually what you want to go for rotary development, and the HD for pretty much everything else.
Yeah. I've used a bit of PyroCat HD. A local supplier to where I live called Wet Plate Supplies, which I've mentioned before, he makes it up, so I can get it quite easily. I've been using some Berger, the French company, PyroCat PMK PMK Pyro. What's it called? Yeah, PyroCat. Yeah. Is it Pyro? I don't know. Anyway, no. PMK. Yep. So I'm never really too sure what the difference is. I'm getting a nice stain. The highlights are well retained, and that's the magic. That's the magic, isn't it, of these?
Yeah, it really is. It's sort of the big win with PyroCat.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's eminently suited for this sort of subject, I would think. But this Bronica SQA camera, I've often lusted after a Bronica SQA, but my days of gas are behind me, I think.
Yeah, they're super cheap, but the problem is they are electronic. The electronic leaf shutters are unserviceable. There's not really any place that you can send them anymore. Bronica had been bought by Tamron years ago.
That's right. Yeah, I remember that.
And there's no service bureaus at all. So I ended up buying 3 of them and a whole litany of lenses because I just wanted, through attrition, to make sure that I could still shoot it for a while.
Yeah, these are great. I'm now I've moved on a bit now. Called Sleep Tight Pleasant Dreams, and this is an old rusting bed frame in a cell. Again with your Bronica SQA and T-Max 400 in PyroCat. But it looks pretty bright in there. Is it well illuminated, or is it just that little eye of God light at the top?
Yeah, that's the only light you really have. The only thing coming in now. The ones that I photograph in are ones that have the door pulled open, completely, and so I'm sticking one leg all the way into the cell because they don't let you go into the cell yourself in most cases. Extending that about as far out as I can get, and then sticking the lens in there, which is always a challenge because especially with the large format stuff, you lose sight of the lens because it's now ahead of you in this darkened area. So I've learned to use a little cosmetic mirror and a flashlight. So I know, I could see where my shutter speeds are and my aperture, and it's pretty easy to shut down the lens itself with the little flippy thing.
In the same way that the prisoners would have held out the mirrors to see
who was coming down the hall. Yeah.
So I would imagine you. Do you find yourself in this place often coming away without making a picture, or do you find that most of the times you're...
The only time that I felt like I really couldn't photograph was there are times when they have organized tourists come through, and you're just waiting and waiting and waiting for them to clear out because it's not even something that you could make into an interesting stream of people as they go by.
Yeah.
Or when I've I've gone there and, I brought my own problem with me. I went in with a preconceived notion that I've shot everything and maybe I'll walk away with something that I hadn't seen before. And when I go in with a bad attitude like that, I come away with nothing.
State of mind.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? About the kind of mind frame you're in to go out on a, if you're going out to make photographs, what sort of mindset you're in, and how that affects what you eventually may or may not come away with. Food for thought.
Yeah.
It is, and I'm thinking as well, looking at the time that we have, I think we're going to have to start to bring things to a close now, I believe. Yeah, so...
another guest to get on again, I think.
I think so, yeah. Gregg, it's been great listening to you and great talking to you.
It's been great to talk with you guys.
Yeah. Well, before we do shout-outs and people and direct people to where you're at, I just want to thank those people that have donated to us since the last show, namely James Thorpe.
Yay, good old James.
Yeah, and excuse me, and we've got somebody here called Jess Lance, and in brackets, yeah, guys, I'm a dude.
Yeah. Okay.
So I guessed correctly, which is good, because you did call him a girl last time.
Yes.
Yes, you remember now.
Well, I wasn't sure, was I?
No. Well, he is, and he commented to say, "You have me flapping my hands like a pigeon trapped in a greenhouse." So that'll be talking about the beer mats there. And Christopher J. May has contributed again, and he said, another most enjoyable episode. This podcast has done more to get me out using large format gear than anything else in the past several years. Cheers, gentlemen, and see you in a fortnight.
So he gets halfway through. He said, "I can't bear this anymore. I'm going out with my camera." There was a long email. You know what we've also forgotten? Probably too late again now. So you're going to have to apologise to that person who sent in the long email that we were going to read, weren't we?
You've
forgotten.
I've completely forgotten all about that. So
I know.
That's a double apology there, because I've even forgot we were going to do it.
And forgotten who sent it in.
Exactly. So so sorry.
Apologise to whoever you were.
Yes. And actually, you were talking about dry plates earlier, Gregg. You'll be interested to hear that we've got Jason Lane lined up to be coming on the show soon. Jason, I think that's
Jay Lane Photographic, I think, or something.
Exactly.
Yeah. I've got him lined up to purchase some plates from him pretty soon.
Excellent. Well, we had Jason on the Classic Lenses podcast about 2 months ago, and it was fascinating chatting to him about a lot of things that we thought we knew about, and turned out we know absolutely nothing. Because,
that guy has a supernatural amount of knowledge. Nobody should know that much about lenses.
No.
That was an incredibly good episode.
Good. I didn't realize you were listening to that. So that's good to know. But yeah, it was fascinating, and we touched upon the dry plate stuff, but we also knew that really that wasn't really the best time to be going through that. So we will have Jason joining us in the near future. So that's all of those things. Andrew, have you got any shout outs or anything you want to talk about this week before we disappear?
No, don't think so.
No, that's okay.
I really should come much better prepared.
Yeah.
Because I do my guest research and then I forget things like shout outs.
Oh, no worries. Well, have you got any shout outs, Gregg?
I do. Sort of an unusual one. Not really large format related, but I suggest everybody go to their local art museum and look at how the classic painters sort of picked up on things like leading lines and the use of color and shadow and the use of directional light, because all those things can really feed into the the shots that you pick up on that maybe you weren't quite going to get unless you had those things in the back of your mind because you went to a museum and saw the classic painters saw those kinds of things.
I think that's an excellent one there, and I've seen a few. I mean, I tend not to go to the art museums, so I'm not too sure there aren't many around where I am, at least anyway. But there's when I see programs talking about certain paintings, and I feel since I've gone back into photography in a reasonably big way, I do seem to understand a lot more about what they're talking about and how they're actually. How these paintings were set out and what they were trying to achieve. It seems to make a lot more sense to me now.
Yeah,
and your eyes are being open to image making in general. So I think once you get tuned in to be it image making through photography, then you'd be foolish to ignore other forms of image making and. I think it's very easy to find yourself drawn into other areas of and to appreciate it. But it's a great call you made there, Greg, to go and check out. Plus, you're supporting your local art institution or art gallery as well.
Absolutely, they keep on getting their funding cut all the time by government, and it's still a great resource for photographers, even if photography isn't even exhibited.
Yeah.
Actually, just on a similar note. Old photographs, especially like taken in the late 1800s and such. I remember watching another program about wet plate photography in its infancy, and I was just looking at some of these photographs that were taken in certain parts of Britain, and I was looking at them and. What struck me is like they could have been taken today. All the things I would look for in how I would compose a photograph or what I think was a well composed photograph. I was seeing these things that were being done 120 years ago, and that sort of shocked me. I was thinking, this looks modern, and it's the same rules apply to what is beautiful, what is well composed, whether it be a painting, whether it be an old photograph, whether it be a new digital photograph now. Those rules still apply.
Yeah, you guys have such a wealth of like beautiful cathedrals and abbeys and what have you. Some of the stuff that Frederick Evans did early in the 19th century. His work was just amazing with some of the images that he took in those places. Just the use of shadow and really letting your darks go to dark and the way that the sort of the pictorialist style of the lenses of the time, all of that sorts to swirl the pot and make this beautiful recipe of an image. And I don't know if you're familiar with Bruce Barnbaum.
I mentioned him, I think, 1 or 2 shows back, I think on this podcast, but I have his book. He did a whole series of cathedral studies, didn't he?
Absolutely.
He's got some great books as well. I've got his Way of Seeing, I think, and another one, The Art of Photography, or something, two of his books.
Yeah. He has a great book called, I think it's called Symphony. Yeah. And it's in different movements. And so he has images made in slot canyons as one movement. He has one area of, I think, industrial sort of images, sort of like a Charles Sheeler kind of work. And then he has a section on the cathedrals and just amazing stuff.
He has some YouTube videos out as well with some of his teaching stuff on there.
Yeah. And, he loves shadows in Zone 4.
Yes, that's right, Zone 4. He's in both recent issues of Photo Classic International, which European listeners can subscribe to, Photo Classic International magazine. He's got articles in both of those. Really articles looking at ways of seeing and why we photograph. But he places his shadows on Zone 4. And he was the first. I think it was when Ben Horn came on the show. We were talking about slot canyons, and Bruce was probably the first person to start making photographs in places like Antelope Canyon. And he stopped making photographs in those places in probably the late 80s when he couldn't get in them anymore because they were just full of coach loads of tourists.
Yeah.
But he's a great. So we'd recommend it. So if I'm going to shout out anybody, I think I may have shouted him out before. Bruce Barnbaum's books and his work, certainly worth following up.
Of course, you got to give the shout out of the week to Andrew Sanderson.
Well, because I haven't mentioned him this week, you mean?
Because you haven't mentioned him. You did get your salt prints in, but you didn't mention Andrew. Andrew has become a good friend on social media, and he's, through his books, he's helped me out quite a bit in opening my eyes to different ways and different opportunities to see things. So
his book on home photography is still one of my favorite books.
I actually have that on my corner table right now.
Yeah, it's
a great book.
Whatever your subject matter, whatever, if you want to improve your photography and the way you see things, buy Andrew's book on home photography. There you go. I've got another plug-in for Andrew. That's another £1.50 commission. Thanks for reminding me, Greg. I nearly missed out on it this week.
So, Greg, how can people follow you outside of this podcast and the various Facebook groups that you occupy?
I can always be found on Flickr. It's Gregg Obst, all one word, GreggObst. And similarly on Instagram at the same username. Both of those are sort of mirrors of one another. For the large format stuff, I'd recommend Flickr definitely, because you can see it in a reasonable size. And I am on various the Lensless podcast photography group, the large format photography podcast group, and of course the negative positives photography Facebook group pretty much every day. So,
well, it's been great having you with us, Greg.
It's been great being here.
Okay, so just us two, Andrew, how can people keep up with you?
So after ballsing it up last time, you can find me, generally speaking, as Warboy Snapper on Twitter. You can find me Warboy Snapper on Instagram. You can find me most days on the Large Format Photography Podcast Facebook group. That would be about it. Oh, and I have an occasional blog as well, andrewbartram.wordpress, I think, something like that. And I've just been scanning some negatives today with a view to another little blog post. But that's another story.
Okay, and you can find me... oh dear, coughing every time I speak today. You can find me on Instagram as Simon Forster Photographic. I'm on Twitter as Simon4, that's Simon and FOR. I am on Flickr, and I haven't added anything for ages, which I really need to do that. You can. Oh, I'm on another podcast. The classic.
See, I didn't mention mine this week.
No. That's, I thought I'd better mention it. So that's one that goes out weekly. And as Andrew mentioned earlier, you can find us both in the Facebook group, which is the same name as the podcast, which is the Large Format Photography Podcast. So I just want to thank Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com, who provides our music, which is Two Finger Johnny. And that's it. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, and it'll be great if you can come back in a couple of weeks. So goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You'll have to cut that little bit of silence.
No, that's staying.